The ideas and information discussed in this webinar are featured in two books, Creating Kind and Compassionate Kids and Creating Strong Kids Through Writing, by Deborah S. Delisle and James R. Delisle, available from proofrock.com, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite local bookseller.
So now let me introduce these two authors who I have known of our first author for many years, and I have been friends with our second for many years. And boy, are their accomplishments just a tremendous mouthful. Deborah Delisle is currently the CEO of the Alliance for Education, Excellent Education. That's a Washington-based organization that focuses on improving educational outcomes and lives for high school students. She is the former executive and CEO of ASCD. She was formerly U.S. Department of Education Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education from 2012 to 2015. She has 40 years in education that includes classroom experience, includes superintendent of public instruction for Ohio. She was also a district superintendent and, like I said, a classroom teacher. And Jim Delisle, is been in gifted education for more than 40 years. Kent State University for 25 years as the distinguished professor of special education. One of the things that's really important about Jim, in my view of him, is he continued to work with kids in the classroom all the years that he was a professor. So from 1998 to 2008, he worked with uh, 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 upper elementary students who are gifted in middle school. And then in the past few years, and now that he's in retirement and living in South Carolina, he has worked with kids in the Scholars Academy in Conway, South Carolina. And he is an author of more than 20 books and 250 articles. I couldn't find two more amazing folks to come talk to us today. So thank you, Jim and Deb. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you. It's so
Thank you.
great to be here, and hope everyone who is well, and we thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. And I want to share what Deb said, and welcome to all of you. And I hope the information that we both provide comes from the head and the heart, because that's where we both come from our professional experiences.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thank you for all the kind words to the audience as well. And let me ask you that, guys. When I'm thinking about this book, these two books, what's the history behind these two projects? You guys don't normally write books together, so what brought you together for this particular two project?
Well, first, let me say I was glad we were able to write a second one. So survive that. We have very different writing styles. So that's really good. I think for me, as I've been an educator for over 40 years, as you mentioned, Joel, and I think for me, one of the things I experienced, particularly when I was a middle school teacher, was that kids wanted to care, but they didn't necessarily know how to act upon their caring. And I think the more I've interacted with kids and with educators, not just in our country, but around the world, I just always find that people are always looking for these ideas and very strong examples of how people can engage in building strong relationships with kids. And I know that that relationship piece is so important, actually far more important even than, good learning and effective learning happens when relationships are built first. Then you can get on to higher standards with kids and higher expectations. Kids will do anything for you. I also firmly believe that what we offer to our kids tells them what it is that we value. So when we engage in activities in which they can act upon their caring, that says to them, we care about that enough to help create better, bigger hearts, for example. So.
And Deb's experiences as a classroom teacher of gifted kids, really focused on the language arts area, and mine did both language arts and social studies. And I think what brought us to write books like this, and also just to consider the importance of activities that combine the head and the heart, so to speak, is we've thought long and hard that both social studies and language arts, the ultimate goal is to help our kids to become better people. Maybe they can become better writers or more conversant in what's going on in the world, but to have them be able to, at the age of 8 or 10 or 12 or 15, actually leave an impact on other people they may never meet, that really, I think when you blend together language arts, social studies, maybe other subjects as well, but those are the two that we're most familiar with. I think really I don't want to focus specifically on the book, but the activities in the books are all stuff that we've done with kids. And one of the things I'm proud of is every activity that we do and every activity that we share with our readers actually has examples of how kids have responded to those activities. It's not just try this activity, we think it'll work. We say try this activity because we know it works.
Yeah. And I think what's really important to emphasize on that, don't you, is that the examples we provide, while somebody may say, well, that's one kid, I mean, we have files and files of examples from kids. It was hard to pick one example for the book. I mean, I can tell you we just have, and we've used them with all kids of all levels. And it's always amazing to me, whether it's a student with an intellectual challenge or a physical challenge, it doesn't matter because kids can express themselves in a variety of ways. And I think that's what really appeals to us, particularly in this day and age when we find that, you know, that relationships sometimes are the thing that creates a safety net for kids when they know you care about them. As long as a kid feels that you value them and you get to know them, anything is possible in a classroom.
Yeah, and even though this book is not intended, neither book is dedicated specifically to gifted kids. The activities have been done in regular classes with gifted kids and others. But one thing that we've always believed is there's no such thing, for example, as a gifted curriculum. It's the kids who are gifted or the kids who have special needs. It's the curriculum, there's the way to get to them rather than the curriculum itself being gifted or exceptional in any way.
Jill, you are muted.
Sorry, I caught myself laughing. I laughed at Deb's joke and I took the focus, so I was trying to mute myself. You guys talk about some of the practical aspects of building social and emotional competence, and you talk about the components of that are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. Have you seen that those results, those benefits in your classrooms? Have you seen kids who've done these lessons and then that results in real change in their lives?
I think so. For me, what's been pretty astounding is social media has allowed me to reconnect with kids that I had who are now 40 years old and, you know, have their own children. And some of them are now teachers. And so they'll connect back with me and say, hey, you know, remember when we did this? And quite honestly, some of the examples that they share with me, I don't remember. Now they're replicating those with their own students as well. And so, you know, we have seen kids who talk about, you know, when you were my sixth grade teacher, I may not remember all the things you taught me in science, but I remember the project on, and they fill in the blank. So a really good example, which I don't know it's not included in the book on Project Kid to Kid, but when Hurricane Hugo hit South Carolina, this was many years ago, I was a sixth grade teacher, and one of my students came in and he said, like, what are we going to do about this? And so their natural inclination was to send letters to kids just to say, we care about you. And I was like, well, these people don't even have houses anymore, let alone a mailbox. So what else can we do? And a project was born out of that. And it just sort of grew every single week. And I was like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? I got to get to the social studies standards. But what I recognized is that kids were learning so much from one another. And they were actually learning empathy and caring. And I thought, if they could carry that into the next phase of their life, into high school and then in the university level, or, you know, be a civic organization. Some of these kids are leaders in their communities now and within their states. So I have seen that occur, you know, all the time. And I think what we find all the time is when kids are struggling in school is that they don't have somebody with whom they can connect just naturally. And so kids who connect with other kids are really vital, but also people, when they find an outlet, wow, I can care so often about somebody else, maybe somebody else worse than I have. You know, they find this emotional outpouring of caring for other people. And even kids who don't have the most in their lives realize that there are people in their community who have even less than them. And if they can give back to their community, they find a sense of purpose. And I think that sense of purpose is what's really missing now. The other thing I get really concerned about is that I don't want, in this age of everybody's going to do SEL, we're all going to do it. And my fear is that people don't do it routinely, so it becomes engaged in the DNA of the school. And I think you would agree with that, Jim, that it can't be a Friday afternoon activity. Check the box. Oh, even did one of those activities from the Delisle book,
Yeah.
check the box, but people have to carry that through. I think we show that in a way of how to extend lessons, et cetera, in the books.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what Deb said. But Jill, you had mentioned that when I was a professor, which I was for 25 years, I think only out of the first 10 years, I just was a professor. And I thought, that's it. And I got really tired and really, in a way, really bored, because I went into education to affect the lives of kids. And the more degrees I got, the fewer kids I saw. And that made no sense to me. If I was going to tell my college students, undergrads and grads, how to be a good teacher, and I wasn't doing it, that made no sense. And there was really, literally, no reward at higher education for staying in the classroom or returning to the classroom. And so I did, and I did for 1 year. I was a fourth grade teacher, and that
In
was
a mobile unit.
and well,
trailer.
we called it a learning cottage, but
Oh,
yes,
okay.
it was. But after that 1 year, that was in 1991. There was not 1 year between then and the year I retired, 2008, that I didn't spend at least 1 day a week in a classroom. And like Deb said, I am now in touch with dozens,
Yeah.
100 of my former fourth graders, eighth graders, current ninth graders, and I was only there 1 day a week.
Oh, wait, you got to tell one thing. This is the best. Tell the story what happened a couple of weeks ago from one of your former fourth graders. The Air Force guy.
I taught this kid who was probably one of the most creative kids I've ever taught in my life. He was a teacher's nightmare. Everyone wants one of this kid in their classroom a year, because more than one would just have you.
Oh, no, one in a lifetime.
Yeah, his name is Clark. I won't give his last name, but Clark is awesome. And he entered the Air Force, I don't know, a number of years ago. And he's been stationed all over the world. Anytime I travel, one of the good parts about my travels is I oftentimes connect with kids who have moved other places. And Clark now lives in North Carolina, and we're in South Carolina. And during the COVID thing, I made a plan of writing and calling 3 people a day who I hadn't been in touch with for quite a while. And Clark was on my checklist for that day. Well, it turns out that he lives just maybe 50 miles away. And he said, I'm a fighter pilot and I need to do training exercises. So how about if I fly over your house next week so I can introduce your 18-month-old grandson, who's now living with us, to what it's like. So we had a flyover, compliment to the U.S. Air Force, and this fourth grader who is now, has 2 kids of his own, and they didn't connect with me and with Deb because we taught English good. They taught because of something that we connected with. And
that's cool.
I think the best teachers know that. They know that differentiation is not curriculum. Differentiation has to do more with attitude. And if you have the right attitude, you can differentiate.
I think the best part, our son, who's in his 40s, was more impressed now with his father.
You can get a flyover for my baby.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great story. Deb mentioned that there's this sort of big, SEL has gotten to be sort of a movement now, and it's everywhere. How do you, from your experience, how do you distinguish between good quality SEL materials and curriculum and what, I guess back when I started in gifted education, we might have called the kind of the fluff that is just filler.
Yeah. Well, and certainly we know that the whole piece around, if you can't measure it, then we don't teach it or engage in it, right? And I think people are beginning to see now that there has to be an and with academics and social emotional learning. So, I'd recommend people go to the Castle CASEL website. There are a lot of resources there. My fear is that it's going to be too checkmarky. We'll do it whenever, on Friday, as I mentioned, at 1:00. One of the things I would say is that it's almost when you walk into a building, you can feel it. And many viewers, I'm hoping, and participants on this would recognize when you walk into a school, let's just even say if you were moving and you wanted to look at a school for your children as you're relocating them, you get a sense. I remember visiting when I was the assistant secretary, I walked into a school in one of our states, and this folks said, oh, we're doing a lot on social emotional learning. And I'm going to be flip about this, but I hope you understand the point. I walked in and there were dead plants all over in the lobby. And I thought, my God, these people can't take care of plants, let alone heart and soul, right? There's a flavor to a school. It's in the DNA of that school. People care about one another. So when you get adults who are caring about one another, it just shows that's the part of SEL that's absolutely so vital. And it's what people are looking for as future business people, in terms of what kind of people do they want to employ in their environment. They don't want to have to you can provide and give kids technical skills when they get on the job, but you can't teach kids how to act upon their caring about your colleague.
And I think we often overcomplicate this. And I'm going to go back to an article that I reference quite often when I'm speaking to audiences, and it's by Carolyn Tomlinson, who I think a lot of folks know as kind of the queen of differentiation, if you will. But she had an article published maybe 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, called How to Connect with Kids. And I just want to raise three things that she said, because to me, these are the foundational aspects of SEL. She said, and they're real simple, but she said, first of all, study your students. And as she put it, take a minute every day to remember that those tennis shoes are attached to lives filled with dreams and warts. Her second one was, and I love this, watch your students and reflect aloud. Imagine if you said this to your kids. As I've watched you recently, you've taught me something that I hadn't understood before. Every kid would sit up and go, I need more. And one of the other ones, and again, especially good maybe for kids who really excel at learning, was she said, set scary goals. And what she wrote is, there is nothing more ennobling than realizing that a person you respect believes you are better or more capable than you yourself believe. Once you give the kids those foundations, they'll walk on water or fire, wherever for your nails, because they believe that you believe in them. And that's the undergirding of it all. We don't need to overcomplicate this. You just deal with people as people, even though they're little.
Yeah. When I was teaching middle school one year, I was teaching the advanced math class, advanced language arts class. And I said I would take the kids were tracked at the time. I would take the lowest, however they got those kids, the lowest math class. And I remember starting to teach, it was really a pre-algebra concept in terms of what is X and how to solve equations. And I said to the kids one day, I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. You're doing high school math. You're going to solve for X. And the kids were looking at me like, oh, Mrs. D, we can't do that. And I was like, what do you mean you can't do that? Hey, you can do that. And I used a very simple example. And from that moment on, just that one time of my saying, look at you doing high school math, they wanted to do it. And they went home and they told their parents about it. And I got a call one time from this mom who said, my kid cannot do high school math. I was like, oh, your kid could do whatever you believe that kid could do. So that's, even though that isn't a lesson in the book, that's SEL by example. It's living SEL every single day. When you say to your kids, I believe in you, right? So when I said, everything we do tells our kids what it is that we value, how we approach them. What do we say to them? This was like how many years ago? Our son is 42 now. And when Matt was in first grade, we had just moved to a new community in Ohio. And so Jim was the one who got Matt after school, and he was watching a teacher one day say to the kids something really positive to them on the way out. She might not have known that was SEL, but it was like, oh, Susie, thank you for helping me with the whiteboard, whatever it was. And one last kid, she just paused with. And then, as a practitioner, like, I'm sure she's thinking of, what do I say to you? And she looked at him, she said, Billy, it's so nice you didn't bite anybody today. So even looking for the positive and reinforcing that, right? So it's now hard for an 18-month-old to be in our house. We're like, okay, we're not going to scream today, are we? But how do you live out that SEL? And some of our kids today don't get that at home. And it's not an indictment of parents. Parents are sometimes very busy. Parents don't know how. If they didn't have a parent who modeled that for them, so you've got to continue, because it does provide that safety net for kids, which really during this time when kids are quarantined, it's even more important now than ever before. So when people call me and say, well, what should we do? I don't know another lesson to give. I'm always like, just build relationships with those kids first and foremost, and then the learning will follow. The academic learning will follow.
Yeah, I currently I teach ninth graders one day a month, which I like to joke is the best way to teach ninth graders. It's one day a month. But these kids go to a public school designed for gifted kids. And I was doing virtual learning with them a couple of weeks back, and these are all freshmen. And one of the kids, I've known him as a student for a year, but one of the kids was there with his twin 2-year-old brothers. And they weren't just there for a minute. He was taking care of them while his parents were working.
Yeah.
Not just today, but for the entire time they've been home. I mean, that kid has more responsibilities than I have. he's supposed to be a student. He's supposed to be so smart, and he has to also take care of twin 2-year-olds while he's going to school. So I think I think this COVID thing has really brought out the need for us to be as empathetic as we can to kids whom we might assume have it made, and they don't. And maybe if one of the only things that's happened good with this virtual climate is maybe seeing that aspect of our kids that we may not see on a day-to-day basis in
Yeah,
school.
yeah. You know, we have one example in the book we use. It's actually a book by Judith Viorst called "If I Were in Charge of the World," and that activity. I don't know. I have a picture. I don't know if you could see this. This is actually a picture of the book cover. I just ran it off. We're between places, so I know I have it on my desk at work. And so I just gave it out to kids. Can you imagine now if you did that with your class? And you know, my kids in 6th grade, this is a sample of one of my students. Actually, it's her birthday today. So if we were in charge of the world, all drinking fountains would be filled with Dr. Pepper. Candy would clean your teeth like toothpaste, and McDonald's food would have no calories. Can you imagine, though, during COVID and the quarantine, what kids may say, and be able to roll out in a poem in ways that actually reveal really what's going on in their hearts, you know, some of the struggles that they have. And I know in an age of social isolationism, which is occurring more and more right now, how many kids just feel the need to do it. And kids just need an outlet for how they feel, and they need to find what we really call that they're not a minority of one. They're not the only kid who feels like that. So in terms of a lot of these activities that we've done with our students, it may be revealed that, you know, one of their parents is perhaps is dying. One of their parents is imprisoned. Their parents are now, you know, at the country club. I mean, it ranges. It's not just one socioeconomic group. It crosses all kinds of racial lines, etc. Kids need to be bonded together by what they're feeling. So they're not feeling like I'm the only kid who feels like this in my school. And this begins to reveal it. And we give tips about in the books about, you know, if they want to share, choose it. Don't force every kid to share all the time. You know, make some public displays, don't make it. Maybe call a kid, you know, after work, after school one day and just say, hey, I'm worried about you, or thinking about you. Is there anything I could do to help you that way? So I think there are so many extensions that could happen. And again, I'd reiterate that even though there may be a grade span, for example, grades 3 through 6 on one of the books, that doesn't mean you can't take some of the principles out of those and put them down to grade 2, or it doesn't mean you can't expand them to grades 7 and 8. Because some of the teachers with whom I've worked, or when I was a principal, I would give some lessons very similarly and say, make it what you want of it. Like, think about the developmental stage of your kids, and then go for it with your students.
Yeah, I noticed that too with a lot of the activities that they're not, there's no specific content that would require a kid who to self-explore. The questions can be modified and used
The
in
one
other
I gave
grades.
you the example of, if I were in charge of the world, actually I've seen done in high schools very, very well. And kids do it, or, you know, if I'm in charge of the world when I'm 32 and they begin to project what their life is going to be like. If they had control of their lives with everything, what do they want to be? And it helps sometimes counselors figure out, you know, how do we help kids on these pathways out of high school into college and what they're doing later.
What? Yeah, I had one of the folks that is attending right now email me earlier, and she wanted me to ask you about social emotional learning in the age of this remote learning that we've had to do here at the end of the school year. Do you have any tips, any suggestions about what the problems you'll hit with that, or the solutions that you might have in mind?
One thing that I offered my own students, again, these are 9th graders, so maybe not totally operable for the very youngest of kids, but you know, they had schedules for what they were supposed to do until school ended, which was this week. And I basically said, how about if there's just an open forum where I will be available, the principal set it up, and anyone who wants to just come in and chat, come in and talk. And I had some loaded questions, if you will, to ask them, but I really wanted to see what was on their minds. And I had kids say, you know, what I miss the most is giving my friend a hug. Another one said, what I miss the most is getting a haircut. That's why I'm wearing a hat. You know, so it was everything from the mundane, but not mundane to him, but mundane to the essential. And I think sometimes we don't need to plan as much as listen. I think if teachers and parents maybe if 75% of the time was spent listening and 25% talking instead of the reverse, I think that would be one of the biggest helps we
Yeah.
could give.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of educators. We have a Future Ready Schools program that actually spans K through 12. And we're getting a lot of examples of people using digital tools effectively. And one is simply like at a lower grade level, even just putting up smiley face or, you know, like kind of straight face and a sad face and just saying, today I'm feeling this way. And again, not making that public, but allowing teachers to connect, or a school counselor or some other advocate for kids to connect back with that family or the kids to make sure it's like that temperature check you could do every day. And I know that, you know, we're here to talk about, you know, how do we help kids to grow? I also don't want us to forget in this quarantining that we also need to take care of the adults in our buildings. You know, one of my concerns on this SEL movement is that we also have adults who are dealing with challenges in their own lives. And so we need to be careful, and we need to, as adults, as colleagues, as, you know, leaders, we need to be sure that we're taking care of the adults. There was a statistic recently, and it's probably soared, that more than 65 teachers in the New York City schools have been victims of COVID. Can you imagine going back to those schools without having the appropriate mourning period? So I'd also say to offer like water cooler conversations, have a leader or colleagues, all the sixth grade teachers drop in on a Zoom meeting or Zoom call like at noon every Wednesday. You don't have to, but maybe take a temperature check of your colleagues, maybe helping your colleagues, because you don't have those all the you know, on site, hey, what did you do about this, or hey, did you connect with Juan, or because I didn't hear from him today. Because we do have kids who are also unplugged and they're kind of disappearing from the rosters right now. So again, that collaboration needs to occur. We need to figure out, it's not great to Zoom. I'm a huge hugger, so it's really hard for me nowadays not to hug. In fact, we were walking somewhere the other day, and, you know, Jim and I went to the store and we had our masks on, and I was like, I smile at everybody I see. And then I was like, how do you smile in a mask? And I was like, okay, maybe my eyes will smile. And I happened to say that to one of the clerks. And he goes, I think I could see your smile in your eyes. I was like, no, I'm going to work on that right now. But we also need the adults to connect with one another and maybe jointly come together and say, you know what, let's connect with our kids from this class and let's do it this way. Or maybe we could send a note to parents and just say, you know, or whatever, we're going to all hold up signs at such and such a time. I've seen videos from, you've seen them too on social media, of teachers getting together as a school and putting together just from iPhones, you know, videos, holding up signs and saying, we miss you, we're here for you, that kind of thing. So I think there are a lot of ways we can do that. But I think this, the pandemic and the ultimate quarantine has demonstrated to us how much social connections matter, how much they matter more than anything else.
If I could add one thing, I did a virtual panel late last month with 4 teenagers from Colorado, and it's on YouTube. If you just put my name and Gifted Development Center student panel, you'll find it. And it's had quite a few hits already, but the kids were great. I mean, I didn't know any of them, and they were just speaking from the heart. And I think one thing, if we have, especially young teenagers, so instead of listening to us, have them listen to kids their own age or just slightly older. And they oftentimes will, even we might say the same things as adults, they have more credibility because they're so close in age to them. So sometimes the best resources we have for a 4th grader might be a 6th grader, for a 6th grader might be an 8th grader. And I think, again, we sometimes want to plan everything so deliberately instead of just letting it flow freely and intervening when need be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me pause for just a second here, and I'm going to ask you guys to walk us through. In fact, I'd ask you guys to walk us through a few of the activities from the book, and so I'd like to touch upon that before we go to the Q&A. But I would like to ask everyone who's attending, if you have questions, please go to the Q&A box. Please add your questions in. Those of you who can read through those questions, if you'll upvote the ones that you'd like to see answered. The way these work, given the, you know, we have, 300 folks attending right now, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. So we need those upvotes to know which ones we definitely would like to get asked when Stephanie takes over. But you guys had a few activities that you were willing to talk through a little bit.
Sure.
Right. One was Deb's.
If I were in charge of the world, and do you want to do the mistakes one?
Yeah,
That may be great.
This is actually the first, excuse me, the first hand. I'm going to get a drink. I'm sorry.
Here. Sorry.
I feel like Marco Rubio during the State of the Union. All right. It's the activity called Great Mistakes. I think
Yes.
Stephanie has it up there.
No footprints. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Um, one of the things we know about kids, gifted kids, but also others, is they really don't like making mistakes. They just feel they're wrong all the time. So what this first activity does, it's really a fun activity and just a way to let them know it's okay to not be perfect, is I bring up the fact that, for example, J.K. Rowling had 25 rejections before her Harry Potter book was published. Steven Spielberg was a high school dropout, and look what he's doing now. Things like chocolate chip cookies, Velcro, silly putty were all invented by accident. And so I put all those things in a bag and then pull them out one at a time after the kids guess what it is. After they see that mistakes are universal, we then ask them to think about things in their own lives that they've done that made them look silly or embarrassed or whatever. And you can see some of them here on the screen. I'll read just a couple in case it's small. My feet fell asleep in the band room, and every time I stood up, I fell down. Uh,
Oh, the sand in the bathing suit.
yeah,
It's a little tacky though.
I got some sand in my bathing suit. I was riding waves in the ocean. I pulled my bathing suit down to get the sand out, and then I came to my senses when the waves retreated. And I was left with my swim trunks down by my knees. And just one more that's on the next page. Uh, let's see which one. Let's do this one. My dad and I always punch each other softly. I went up to this guy who looked like my dad and started punching him in the stomach, luckily just softly because he wasn't my dad. So we do this with the kids, and then we have a bulletin board in the school hallway called Our Great Mistakes, which is all teachers. And the teachers have their photograph up there, and then they have a great mistake they've made kind of in a little bubble, and we even spell mistakes incorrectly on purpose.
And great.
And great. So it basically is just a way to let them know we all have this in common. And as the year goes on, there's a great activity at the beginning of the year, because as the year goes on, we're all going to make a bonehead mistake once in a while. And so we celebrate them rather than make believe, they didn't occur. So that's one of them.
Yeah. So this is an example of where you said all of the activities also can be adapted. So I was in a school one time when I was a state chief in Ohio, and I saw ninth graders who had done something very similar to this, and they talked during their transition going into it. They were 11th graders. They reflected on as a ninth grader, and then they put them together as a book, and then they sent them down to the 8th grade, because moving from 8th grade it was moving from several middle schools to one giant high school. It's kind of, I don't know, just really filled with anguish, right? So they had sent it down as a guidebook and say, look, when we went into 9th grade, here are the biggest mistakes we made. And some of them seem silly, but it just gives that little pause, like reaching back and saying, it's going to be okay. Like if you make a mistake, pick yourself up and move on. And I really wish I'd saved a copy of that book, because it was so funny. I mean, some of the mistakes were just hysterical, and it's everything from I couldn't figure out my combination locker to, I ended up eating somebody else's food, or I forgot my gym short. I mean, it's just all kinds of silly little things. So.
Yeah, and another one, Stephanie, we have the footpath of peace, and I think you have a slide for that. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph directly from the book. And it says this: with so much violence and anger spewing from our newspapers, televisions, and popular music, it is sometimes hard to believe that our world is filled with more good people than bad, more beauty than bigotry. This activity helps students to recognize that there is much that is positive about our world, and equally important, that each of us can be an agent of peaceful change. And then we introduced them to some quotes from famous people, like we may have all come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now, from Dr. Martin Luther King, or from Glenda Taylor. It's fearful to know we're connected to everything in the universe, because then we're responsible. So what I do is introduce the kids. Again, it's to maybe people they don't know, but maybe some they do. And then we ask them to think of what it is in their own life. It's a small thing that they've done that really helped other people. And the kids actually take off their shoes and they do a footprint in this footpath of peace. We actually put it on a wall, because if you put it on the floor, it gets mangled. You put it on the wall, and kids read it, and teachers contribute, and parents contribute. And it's everything from, even if you didn't do it yourself, do you ever pick up a piece of paper in the hallway and throw it in the school trash? It's simple things. One other one. I once lived by a lonely man and a lonely dog. Instead of going out to play, I would always go over to talk to the man and play with the dog. And it's simple stuff, but when you're young and 8 years old, 10 years old, these things accumulate, and they're important to be a part of a curriculum rather than distinct from it.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And Jim, can you talk about this last piece, the class poem?
So that was the one I'll switch over. So do you mind if I do it?
No,
Or
go
you
ahead.
want to
No,
talk
go
about?
ahead.
Okay. So that was the one I was sharing before. It's a book originally from Judith Viorst, and actually just before we got on today, Jim thought he had heard that it's also made into several people have made it into a YouTube video as well. And this is just trying to get kids to think about, like, they'll always complain, wow, if I was a principal of a school, we would never have homework. So this actually turns the tables on them and allows them to think about, well, if I was in charge of the entire world, this is what I would do. And this is, to me, a great activity. If I was doing an online lesson right now, or getting ready to prepare for a class that perhaps hasn't even seen me before, whenever school goes back to whatever it goes to, and just have them think about, if you were in charge of, let's say we were entering sixth grade, I'd say, if I was in charge of sixth grade, and give it to those kids, send it out and say, here's a postcard, send it back to me, and you're going to see this on our doors, a poem. And I would turn that into a poem, and kids would be like, oh my gosh, that's the line I contributed, or not. And you can add in your own pieces to make it a little bit more deep, or a little bit more anticipatory. So I think that that's really a really great piece.
One way that we categorized it, so it's meant, because I've done this and Deb has done it with a single class, but I've also done it with a team of 125 kids that create one poem. And so we categorize them. So one group will work on 6 things they change about school. Another with 6 things they change about brothers and sisters, 6 things they change about the environment, 6 things they change about other people, and then they might have 30 different answers to each category, and we pick 1 or 2, or the kids do, and that's, the poem is created basically based on what the kids all wrote. Read the last paragraph on that one that Stephanie put up. Is really good.
If we were in charge of the world, no hungry or needy people would exist. Every nation would be at peace, and people everywhere would always understand what you are trying to say emotionally. If we were in charge of the world. So powerful.
Yeah. So
It's very powerful.
Water fountains with Dr. Pepper, all the way to people understanding you emotionally.
Yeah. If we were in charge of the world, kids couldn't call you names that you didn't like, but if they did, they'd have to apologize and make up with you. Parents would have to eat Brussels sprouts twice each week, and they'd have to go to bed when their kids told them to. So again, it's like, and kids start to understand the differentiation between what I'm in charge of, what I'm not, what I'm responsible for. So again, developing, I think one of the benefits of the book, the way in which we approached it, is to allow a lot of stuff to ooze out of it, so to speak. It's not a very technical term, but I just always like to believe that teachers have a heart and a soul that they bring to the classroom. So although it may be good to do the lesson the way it's done, the next time do it and just let yourself ooze right out of it, include other parts of it. So I just think there are a lot of adaptability possibilities. Is that really good grammar? You probably wouldn't like me to write it that way, would you?
No.
Or maybe Joel, you would edit it out, or Stephanie. So there's a lot that's possible in adapting each of the lessons. Again, grade level wise, developmentally wise, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you guys for sharing that. I do appreciate it. And before I turn this over to Stephanie, let me take everybody back over to our slide with the 2 books, just to remind everyone that these 2 books are available from proofrock.com. The Creating Strong Kids Through Writing is a writing-focused set of activities, obviously, and the Creating Kind and Compassionate Kids is more of a, I would say, project-based. There's storyboards, there's oral presentations, there's interviews, there's lots of different kinds of activities in that book, but all of them surround this idea of the social and emotional development and learning. Stephanie, I think we've got a lot of great questions in the Q&A box. You want to take over and?
Yeah, sure thing. So our first question, are there any evidence-based programs at school to foster empathy development? So someone asking for some of that evidence-based data, I guess.
Okay. So one of the things I would actually send you to a resource, because there are a lot of evidence-based resources on the CASEL website. So CASEL, all one, it stands for the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. There are a lot of evidence-based resources on there both divided out among the categories, as we indicated before, like self-awareness, social responsibility, etc., in addition to almost what I call subcategories underneath that, like empathy, etc.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to add that to the question there, so they have that in writing. Okay, awesome. Next question. I teach gifted middle schoolers, some of them very deeply gifted. In some ways, they are tuning forks for the world. They feel everything in such deep and complex ways. What do you hear and read lately about their emotional lives?
That's like a 15-week course. To answer real quickly, I'm actually going to reference a person whose work I think this teacher, if she doesn't or he or she doesn't know about, should check it out. It's a woman named Anna Marie Roper. It's Roeper. I call her my gifted grandmother. She died in 2012 at the age of 93, I believe. And she has, for her, she worked with gifted young children, especially, for more than 60 years. And she followed them from when the time they were 4 until they were grandparents themselves. Anything you can get from Anna Marie. She trained with Jean Piaget, so she knows her stuff. She helped start Sesame Street. She knows her stuff about kids. And rather than look at a current resource, she was also a Holocaust survivor. So everything she did and her husband did in their school was to make lives better to start. I mean, they looked at that. Curriculum was important, but it wasn't so much as the kids feeling a sense of belonging. So I would go back to Anna Marie's work. It's widely available online, and it really would focus on that. I mean, there are activity books, there are other things, I mean, that I've written, but I would really go back to Anna Marie's work.
Yeah. And I also want to, you're being very humble, because I would actually recommend you look at a lot of Jim's materials as well, especially with very specific strategies, like, don't tell kids you're too old, too young to worry about that. Because that just hurts a child to say, because you kind of dismiss their feelings by saying that, or don't worry about that, somebody else will take care of it. So I'll be a cheerleader for my husband's work as well. I've learned a lot from it, and sometimes when we were parenting, I'd be at different places with our son, and he would give me a strategy or two to use from your own work. So I would also emphasize him.
I want to give you a reference. It's not mine. It's a new book as of last year that I just sent 4 of them to some of my students today. Yeah, I think we have a copy of it here. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse.
Okay.
I got goosebumps just saying the title.
I don't know if you can see this.
It is, let me read just the very beginning pages.
Yeah, could you hold it up again? I think I made a noise and it switched over to me, so say something.
You see, it's hard to see.
Yeah, the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse.
Yeah.
All right.
We found it because it was reviewed in the Washington Post.
Yeah, and again, it won't take more than a minute here, well, maybe 2. It starts like this way. Hello, you started at the beginning, which is impressive. I usually start in the middle and never read introductions. It's surprising that I've made a book because I'm not good at reading them. The truth is, I need pictures. They are like islands, places to go to in a sea of words. This book is for everyone, whether you're 80 or 8. I feel like I'm both sometimes. I'd like it to be one you can dip into anywhere, anytime. Start in the middle if you like, scribble on it, crease the corners, and leave it well thumbed. The drawings are mainly of a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse. I'll tell you a little bit about them, although I'm sure you'll see things that I don't, so I'll be quick. The boy is lonely when the mole first surfaces. They spend time together gazing into the wild. I think the wild is a bit like life, frightening sometimes, but beautiful. In their wanderings, they meet the fox. It's never going to be easy meeting a fox if you're a mole. The boy is full of questions. The mole is greedy for cake. The fox is mainly silent and wary because he's been hurt by life. And then it goes on, and it's illustrated absolutely beautifully. I think I've sold more of this book than my own. But if you want to just have a book that will be a source of comfort, whether you're 8 or 80 years old, I would really recommend this book.
Let me show you one of the lessons in the book. It is the boy talking to the horse. When have you been at your strongest? Asked the boy. The horse responds by saying, when I have dared to show my weakness. Asking for help isn't giving up, said the horse. It's refusing to give up. Sometimes I worry you'll all realize I'm ordinary, said the boy. Love doesn't need you to be extraordinary, said the mole.
It's just it's one of those books I kind of like. It's a combination of The Hobbit, The Wizard of Oz, and The Little Prince,
Mm.
and it all can be read as a bedtime book for parents out there. If you have kids 7, 8 years old, uh, or 18, let them read it on their own. I just sent it to 4 of my high school kids because it just fits. It's at this time of life and this time in our world. It's really a great beginning. I mean, a great resource to have.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Another question we had is how can we add decision making and choice in our kids' life during this time? So, time of COVID, the lack of that is really weighing on my 10-year-old son.
Yeah,
So someone
I
who's
think,
10.
well, this is probably another 15-week course. One of the things I would say is that everything from daily routines, sometimes parents get freaked out about what kids are wearing, for example. And if they're going to go somewhere well, maybe not necessarily right now because they're not necessarily going all out in public, but, instead of just saying that doesn't work, go change again, just say to a kid, here are 2 outfits, pick one of them. And get kids into the habit of doing that early on. I think our books provide a lot of opportunities because kids could make choices in them. They can choose to write a poem. They can choose to do a video. They can choose to just talk about it. So again, allowing kids to do that. And as a parent, I would say is that kids are, as a 10-year-old, I think that person said they have a 10-year-old, as kids mature, they want to know, but they also want to experience what their own limits are. So they go full blown when you want them to kind of hone in and kind of ease itself out, right? Although we're not doing a great job with that with our 18-month-old, but
Yeah.
I think, kids need to know their limits. So say, you can do this, or even if they say, well, my book report isn't due until next Friday, say, okay, I'll give you until Wednesday. And then we're both going to set up a time when you're going to do that, and let kids procrastinate a little bit. We do that as adults. And yet we feel like we've got to organize every kid's day. So try to do that, stretch the rubber band out, bring it back in, stretch that rubber band out and bring it back in.
And even a small thing, what this interview that I did last month that I mentioned, one of the teenage boys from Colorado said that they live in a cul-de-sac and everyone pretty well stays to themselves, except there was at this time, people weren't really socializing at all. But they realized there was a woman in the cul-de-sac who was celebrating her 70th birthday, but she wouldn't be able to do that. So they all got out in social distance and sang happy birthday to her in the cul-de-sac. It's something small, but it helps that person.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes our kids think unless they can make a huge difference, it's not worthwhile. We have to show them how these small things really do add up. And even if they don't add up for the world, they add up for the 70-year-old woman who never would have had a birthday like that without them.
Yeah. Or pose a challenge to a kid. In that case, could have said, Mrs. Jones across the street, I realize it's her 70th birthday. I think her family lives out of town. Is there something that you think we can do for her? And have a kid come up with something, and then maybe even expand upon it. They say, well, let's have a birthday party for her. Say, okay, well, given the restrictions around quarantining, then what might we be able to do? Okay, let's text our neighbors or call them and just say, 9 a.m. on Sunday, can we all stand outside? Or can we just randomly go over every single day before her birthday and give out cards? So help kids to make decisions and realizing they can make an impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Stephanie, maybe one more question, and then because we're running out of time.
Okay. Yeah, so we've talked about the importance of social emotional learning and kind of directing the conversation that way. How do you suggest getting teachers to shift the focus from academics?
I actually think what we're going through now is going to help that a lot. Not by anything direct that we do, but just because of the situation in which we're all existing. And as Deb said, it's not only the kids who are needing this emotional support and the social support. It's the teachers and the principals and everyone, the school board members. I do think there was a coming trend for social and emotional learning. I think this is going to enhance that in a positive direction. And I couldn't imagine, say school starts in a regular way back, in August or whenever school starts where you live. What will that first day of school be like? How will it be different than it would have last year if this had never taken place? And my guess is the social and emotional piece is going to be a huge component that we can't just do on one day and then make believe it's not important anymore. So I actually see this in an odd way as helping the cause
Yeah.
rather than hurting the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I think about is kind of projecting ahead and recognizing that what we're experiencing as adults, we at least have a repertoire of experiences on which we can back up and say, okay, in this case, I did this or that, or I have the resources to do X. I think we've got to think about kids, particularly at the grade levels. I'm going to say middle school on down. There is no closure. And so the social isolationism is going to be very scary in terms we can only predict what the consequences of that isolationism is. I would even recommend, and I have done as a leader across this country, is to recommend that where possible, that kids can see their prior year's teacher. If I was a principal right now, I seriously would consider having kids go back to their teacher that they had. And I know some people retire, some people don't, et cetera, but go back to that teacher as much as possible and spend about a week or two, and then get them up to the next grade level and to the next class. And let's not expect the worst of kids. Like, oh my God, can you happen? The kids will have suffered losses. Kids living with vulnerable populations like grandmas and aunties, those kids may actually not have that same adult in their life anymore. So I think that this is a perfect intersection of we can't go back to ignoring the fact that relationships matter and that social and emotional needs matter. And what I said at the very beginning, what we offer to our kids tells them what it is that we value. So we cannot jump. I'm hoping that no classroom opens up, when they open up, in whatever format, no classroom has a textbook on that desk. Maybe they have a note card that says, I care about you and this is going to be a great year. That's one of the better things that could happen. So let's stop pushing academics right on the front end and recognize that we have got to create this new space together.
That's such, yeah, go ahead, Jim, sorry.
Well, I know we're going to be ending soon. I just wanted to, it seems appropriate. Last year, when I was teaching my ninth graders, on the last day of school, I had them do a writing activity, and they thought I was absolutely out of my mind, because who does that after all the books have been collected? But I want to share with them two questions that I hope our audience, can pose to their own kids today, tomorrow, and next year. The two questions were, what gives you hope and what gives you joy? I gave the kids 10 minutes. I just want to read some of the things they wrote. It gives me hope when I see a friend succeeding in something I helped them learn. It gives me hope when I think of my parents still being alive when I am an adult. It gives me hope when I see a very biased person change his mind. It gives me hope when I see my mother going through so much and still being strong and never hanging her head in shame. It gives me hope, I love this one, when I see that only a few girls have someone to dance with. It gives me hope when I see my grandmother and she still remembers who I am. It gives me hope when I see another meal is on the table. And it gives me hope when my mom says, see you later, instead of goodbye. It gives me joy when I make a baby laugh. It gives me joy when I finish a good book and see the world from the eyes of a character in it. It gives me joy when I feel the hot summer air and know that my season of hope has just begun. It gives me hope when people give me the kindness I deserve. I'm sorry, joy. When people give me the kindness I deserve rather than treating me as if I am not popular. It gives me joy when I read Maya Angelou's poem, Phenomenal Woman. It gives me joy when I hear preschoolers singing their ABCs. It gives me joy when my brother gives me a ride to school happily with no complaints. And lastly, it gives me joy when I wake up on a summer morning, greeted by the sun, and realize that this day has the potential to be the best one of my life.
Oh, that's great.
Just two simple questions, and you will get some very powerful, complex answers.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thanks for sharing that. That was wonderful. I'm going to give these two fine folks contact information for the attendees, but I do want to remind you, these are the two books. The one for younger kids, grades 3 through 6, Creating Kind and Compassionate Kids. And again, you can adapt these because they are sort of self-exploration and social emotional books. It's not like they're the Scarlet Letter. So the content is adaptable, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then Creating Strong Kids Through Writing is grades 4 through 8. So it's a little bit older crowd. And let me show you guys, if you'll take a screenshot of that, if you need that information, you can have that. And then let me show you Deborah and Jim's contact information there. So if you need to reach out to them with questions or concerns, do we have a grandchild coming through?
I think we were trying. He's trying to get in.
Oh, well.
It was like pre-COVID when we actually had went to a barbershop and a hairdresser.
Well, he's welcome to join. All right, guys. Well, listen, y'all have been just so wonderfully gracious. I so appreciate you guys being here and coming and talking to this audience.
Thank you, audience, for being with us, and we wish you well. And this is a journey for all of us to take together for every kid.
Yeah. Think of hope. Think of joy.
Thank you too. Thank you too. And thanks to the audience and Stephanie. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.